I'm 75 now, and I can't remember anybody except the Queen Bee.
The decision landed like thunder behind palace walls. For decades, Camilla had quietly imagined herself linked to one of the monarchy's most treasured private estates, a place wrapped in heritage, influence, and old royal memory. But in one formal move, Catherine was placed at the center of it instead. What looked like an estate decision was something far deeper, a transfer of trust, power, and future authority. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles knew the paper in front of him would not simply change who managed a house. He understood it would change the balance inside his family. The king had approved Catherine as the new official steward and residential authority over Highgrove's private heritage grounds, meaning she would now hold direct responsibility for protecting the estate's private legacy spaces and guiding how they were used in the future. Highgrove, the king's deeply personal country home, was not just bricks, gardens, and gates. It was the place where his taste, his memory, and his private identity had been shaped over decades. To give Catherine authority there was to place her inside the emotional center of his life. Catherine held the formal estate folder with both hands, and for a moment, she did not speak. William watched her face change slowly, first with shock, then with the heavy understanding that this was not a gift without cost. The prince knew his wife had been trusted with something Camilla had long believed would fall naturally within her influence. Catherine understood it too. She was not being handed comfort. She was being handed history, pressure, and a silent accusation from anyone who thought she had stepped into another woman's place. Camilla received the news in a separate room, and the silence around her became almost unbearable. An aide explained that her expected influence over Highgrove had been removed, and the queen consort sat still, wounded by the calmness of the words. Historic Preservation Authority, a formal power to protect and control heritage spaces for the future, had been written beside Catherine's name. Camilla heard the meaning beneath it. She had not simply lost access to plans and rooms. She had lost trust. Charles's signature rested on the final page like a seal over a family fracture. The king had signed before Camilla was told, and that timing carried its own quiet cruelty. William turned one page, then another, until he noticed a handwritten note attached to the file. The prince read it once, then looked at Catherine with a tension he could not hide. This decision had not come from nowhere. Something months earlier had started it all. And before Camilla could even process the loss, the palace began turning toward the people who stood to gain and those who had just been quietly pushed aside. This was never only about land, rooms, gardens, or ancient walls. It was about belonging. Catherine understood that accepting the estate meant accepting a piece of Charles's personal legacy, not just a ceremonial responsibility. Camilla understood something else entirely. That losing it meant losing a dream she had carried silently for years. Between them stood William, watching a family decision harden into a royal fracture. Catherine felt the weight before anyone explained it again. She had spent years building quiet confidence inside the monarchy, not by demanding attention, but by staying steady when the family needed calm. The future queen, meaning the woman expected to one day stand beside William when he becomes king, had earned trust through patience, discipline, and silence. That was why this appointment mattered. It was not a decoration. It was a sign that the crown believed she could protect something deeply personal without turning it into personal power. William watched her closely, because the prince knew what others would say. Catherine looked down at the estate file and told him she did not want this to look like a victory over Camilla. Her voice stayed controlled, but the fear beneath it was clear. She was not afraid of work. She was afraid of becoming the face of another family wound. The prince understood that fear, because every royal decision carried two meanings: the official one the palace released, and the private one people whispered about behind closed doors. Camilla carried a different pain. She had believed Highgrove's private heritage grounds, the personal estate spaces tied to Charles's life, memory, and identity, would naturally remain within her influence. The Queen Consort had stood beside him for years, and in her mind, that closeness gave her a claim no document needed to explain. When she privately told Charles that the estate was the one part of his world she believed would never be handed away from her, the king did not answer quickly. His silence hurt more than refusal. Charles knew the decision had changed something between them. He was beginning to separate emotional loyalty from future constitutional trust, meaning the long-term responsibility of protecting the monarchy beyond personal feeling. William sensed it immediately. The prince saw that Catherine's role was not just about Highgrove, it was about the future order of the family. It was about who would carry royal memory when the old battles could no longer be allowed to decide the next chapter. Then a senior courtier quietly admitted, through a documented palace account prepared for internal review, that Catherine's appointment had been examined by several advisors before Camilla was informed. That one detail changed everything. The Queen Consort had not been surprised by accident. She had been managed. And the more Catherine tried to accept the role with grace, the more Camilla began to see grace as insult, silence as strategy, and the estate decision as punishment. But punishment rarely appears without a trigger, and inside the palace, one earlier moment was now being remembered as the spark that changed everything. Months before Catherine's name appeared on the estate order, one ceremony at Highgrove had quietly poisoned the future. It began as a private garden dedication, the kind of royal gathering meant to appear graceful and harmless. But one sentence, spoken too sharply and heard by the wrong people, turned a peaceful afternoon into the moment everyone later remembered as the point of no return. Camilla had arrived that day believing the estate still belonged to the old emotional order. The Highgrove Garden dedication, a small private ceremony meant to honor Charles's decades of work on the grounds, was supposed to be calm, respectful, and controlled. Catherine stood beside William with the careful patience that had become her strength. The prince noticed everything, because he knew Highgrove was not just another royal property. It was the king's personal refuge, the place where memory and power sat dangerously close together. Charles listened as a private heritage briefing began, and the room seemed to tighten around one simple question: who would protect the estate after him? A heritage briefing, meaning a formal discussion about preserving important royal spaces, should have stayed practical. But Camilla stepped in before the advisor could finish. The Queen Consort insisted that Catherine should not be allowed to oversee spaces she had not lived through. The words were sharp, too sharp. They did not simply challenge Catherine's experience. They questioned her right to belong. Catherine did not answer back. She kept her face calm, but William saw her hand tighten around the program she was holding. The prince understood the wound beneath that small movement. Catherine had accepted years of pressure without complaint, and now Camilla had made her sound like an outsider inside the very future she was expected to carry. That was why the moment mattered. It touched not only pride, but succession, trust, and the question of who would guard the king's private legacy when emotion was no longer enough. Charles heard the remark and stayed silent for too long. The king did not defend Catherine in that instant, and the silence cut both ways. Catherine felt exposed. Camilla felt confirmed. William felt the danger settle in. What looked like one uncomfortable exchange had become something larger, proof that personal attachment could collide with future duty. From that point on, Highgrove was no longer just loved. It was contested. After the ceremony, a heritage advisor wrote a confidential memo, a private warning note used inside palace planning, stating that Camilla's emotional claim to the estate could create future governance problems. William later learned through a documented internal account that Charles kept that memo and attached it to the estate review file. The prince saw the truth immediately. The decision had begun that same day. Camilla discovered the garden incident had been used against her, and hurt turned into fire. The queen consort no longer saw Catherine as a careful steward. She saw her as the beneficiary of one painful sentence. And with that belief burning inside her, she demanded a private meeting. The estate had become a battlefield, and now the two women at the center of it were about to face each other without the softness of ceremony between them. No aides entered the room. No secretaries waited by the door. No carefully worded statement softened what came next. Catherine stood near the fireplace, composed but visibly strained, while Camilla entered carrying the kind of silence that warns of a storm. For the first time, the estate was not discussed through papers, advisors, or royal procedure. It was spoken of as a wound. Camilla had requested the private meeting after discovering that the Highgrove Garden dedication incident had helped justify the estate decision. A private meeting, in royal terms, meant a conversation without staff shaping every sentence, where emotion could finally escape the polished language of the palace. Catherine agreed because she wanted dignity, not rivalry. She knew the appointment had already bruised the queen consort, and she did not want Highgrove to become a trophy held over another woman's pain. Camilla did not begin with anger. She began with hurt. The queen consort told Catherine that Highgrove was the one place she believed history might finally accept her. Not as an outsider, not as a shadow, but as someone woven into Charles's life. Her voice shook when she said the estate had never felt like property to her. It had felt like proof. Catherine listened, and that made the silence harder. She understood the wound, but she also understood the duty now placed in her hands. Catherine answered quietly, but she did not bend. She told Camilla she had not asked for the role, had not chased it, and had not celebrated the pain it caused. Then her tone changed. She said she would not apologize for being trusted with Highgrove. The words landed with force because they were not cruel. They were calm. And sometimes calm hurts more than anger, because it leaves no place for the other person to hide. Camilla then revealed more than she meant to. The queen consort admitted she had already planned changes to the estate's private rooms, believing Charles would eventually place those spaces under her authority. Private rooms, meaning areas of a royal residence not used for public ceremony, but tied to family memory and personal control, were never just rooms inside Highgrove. They were symbols. Catherine realized in that moment that Camilla's expectation was far more advanced than anyone had admitted. Catherine saw the true danger at last. This was not only about disappointment, this was about control. Camilla had built a future in her mind, and Charles had broken it with one signature. The king's decision suddenly looked even more explosive, because it had not merely redirected responsibility. It had stopped a quiet takeover before it could become accepted custom. Catherine felt the weight of that truth settle over the room. William arrived outside just as the raised voices stopped. The prince heard nothing for several seconds, and that silence told him more than words ever could. He knew Catherine had entered the room hoping to calm the wound, but something deeper had been exposed. Camilla had not only lost influence, she had revealed how much influence she believed she already had. And once control entered the conversation, the palace could no longer pretend this was simply about gardens, memory, or one historic estate. The most dangerous part of the decision was not the announcement itself. It was the signature beneath it. Charles had not merely given Catherine a ceremonial role. He had placed legal, symbolic, and household authority into her hands in a way that could not easily be reversed. Behind the polished language was a brutal royal truth. The future was being trusted more than the past. Charles read the final version alone, and the silence around him felt heavier than any argument. The estate order, meaning the formal written instruction that decides who has authority over royal property duties, gave Catherine control over preservation priorities, private heritage access, ceremonial use, and long-term stewardship planning. Those words mattered because they did not simply allow her to visit Highgrove or speak for it on special occasions. They gave her power over how its memory would be protected, who could shape its future, and which hands would guide it beyond the king's own reign. Charles held the pen for a moment longer than necessary. The king knew his advisors had framed the move as preparation for continuity, the careful planning that keeps royal identity stable when one generation gives way to the next. That was why Catherine had been chosen. She and William represented the future structure of the monarchy, and Highgrove's identity had to survive inside their coming chapter. But Charles also knew what the signature would do to Camilla. He knew the queen consort would not read it as planning. She would read it as rejection. The pen touched the page, and the decision became real. Charles set it down slowly, as though even the smallest sound might expose the damage. The king had protected the future, but he had wounded the present. That was the cruel balance of monarchy. A private heart could break quietly, while the institution moved forward without blinking. William stood with Catherine afterward, and the prince chose his words carefully. He told her that accepting power in the monarchy often meant accepting blame first. Catherine understood him immediately. Authority did not arrive as applause. It arrived with whispers, resentment, and the cold weight of people deciding what her motives must have been. The future queen had been trusted, yes, but trust inside the crown could feel very close to isolation. Then came the sealed clause. A sealed clause is a private condition inside a formal document, hidden from public view but binding inside palace authority. This one stated that any future changes to Highgrove's private legacy areas would require Catherine's written approval. That single line limited Camilla more sharply than any public statement ever could. The queen consort could be respected, included, even comforted, but she could not override the woman now guarding the estate's future. William learned through a recorded briefing summary that the clause had been recommended because advisors feared Highgrove could become emotionally contested if Charles's health or workload changed. The prince understood the warning. If affection became control, the estate could turn into a family battleground. Catherine understood it too, and that knowledge made the appointment feel less like honor and more like a shield. Camilla learned about the sealed clause, and quiet sadness gave way to something visible. The queen consort was no longer only hurt, she was exposed. The palace had made its decision in ink, but the human cost of that ink was only beginning to appear. That evening, the palace did not erupt with shouting. It became colder than that. Doors closed softly. Footsteps faded down corridors. Messages were delayed, then ignored. Camilla sat alone after the sealed clause was explained to her, and for the first time, the estate she had long imagined as a place of belonging felt like a locked gate, with Catherine's name now written across it. Camilla did not reach for the papers again. The queen consort had just been told that her informal access to estate planning discussions had been suspended, meaning she could no longer quietly influence future decisions about Highgrove through private conversations or routine briefings. That mattered because informal access inside the palace often carried more power than public titles. A person did not always need a signature to shape a decision. Sometimes they only needed to be in the room before anyone else arrived. Household officials began redirecting Highgrove-related briefings to Catherine's office, and the change became impossible to hide. A briefing, in simple terms, is an official update given to the people responsible for decisions. And now those updates were moving away from Camilla. Catherine's office receiving them meant the transfer was not symbolic. It was practical. It was active. It was happening in real time, through calendars, messages, folders, and silence. Camilla removed her reading glasses and placed them carefully on the table. Then she asked one aide if Charles knew how humiliating this would feel. The aide did not answer quickly, and the delay was answer enough. The queen consort had survived years of public judgment, but this pain cut differently. This was private. This was personal. This came from inside the circle she thought she had finally entered for good. Catherine sat with William that same evening, and the victory felt nothing like victory. She admitted to the prince that she felt sorrow for Camilla, even while understanding why the decision had to stand. William listened without rushing her. He knew Catherine was being pulled into a cruel royal truth. Sometimes the person chosen to protect the future must carry the blame for another person's heartbreak. The prince reminded her that kindness could not mean surrendering authority once the crown had placed it in her hands. Then the quiet machinery moved faster. A courtier noticed that Camilla's name had been removed from a private estate consultation list before the public announcement had even been prepared. A consultation list, meaning the names of people invited to give views before decisions are made, can reveal who truly matters behind palace doors. The removal showed that Camilla had not just been surprised, she had been cut out before the world knew anything had changed. Another aide whispered through a recorded household note that the shift was not temporary. Catherine's authority was meant to endure beyond Charles's reign. Carrying Highgrove into the future, William would one day lead. That detail made the loss deeper for Camilla, and the burden heavier for Catherine. This was not a pause. This was permanence. Charles knew the pain had reached every corner of the family, but the king held back one final explanation. William would hear it first. For all the papers, clauses, and palace machinery, the truth of the decision waited in one private conversation between father and son. There were no courtiers in the room when Charles finally spoke to William. No polished briefing notes, no palace language. Just a father, a son, and the heavy knowledge that the monarchy survives only when someone is trusted enough to carry what others cannot release. William entered carefully. Charles looked older than the decision he had made. Then the king said Catherine's name. Charles had asked for the private meeting, after the first wave of fallout reached every corner of the family. The king knew William needed more than official words. He needed the emotional truth behind the estate transfer, meaning the formal movement of authority over Highgrove from old expectations into Catherine's hands. This mattered because Highgrove was not just a royal place. It was part of Charles's identity, part of his private life, and part of the story he wanted protected when he could no longer protect it himself. William arrived protective of Catherine, but cautious with Charles. The prince knew his wife had been placed in a painful position, and he knew Camilla had been deeply wounded by it. He did not enter as a son looking for comfort. He entered as the future king, trying to understand whether this decision had been made from wisdom, fear, or regret. Charles saw that in him. The king saw the tension in William's face and knew the conversation could not be softened. Charles admitted the truth quietly. Camilla loved Highgrove through him, but Catherine would protect it beyond him. That was the difference. The queen consort's attachment came from memory, marriage, and years of standing beside him. Catherine's stewardship came from duty, restraint, and the future she would one day help carry with William. Stewardship, in plain words, means caring for something important without treating it like personal property. And for Charles, that difference had become impossible to ignore. William's anger began to fade. The prince realized the king was not rejecting Camilla as a woman, or erasing her years beside him. He was trying to stop his most personal world from becoming a future family battleground. Charles knew that if emotional claims controlled Highgrove, then every room, garden, and decision could become a fight after him. William understood then why Catherine had been chosen. She could carry history without needing to possess it. Then Charles revealed what had finally changed everything. Through a recorded private conversation later summarized in a confidential palace account, the king admitted that the Highgrove Garden dedication incident convinced him emotional claims around the estate could one day damage the crown. Camilla's words that day had not been forgotten. Catherine's silence had not been missed. William's reaction had not been ignored. Charles told William that Catherine was chosen because she could hold history without trying to own it. The sentence settled between them with painful clarity. The prince no longer saw only the wound. He saw the warning. He saw the future being protected before grief, pride, and old longing could tear it apart. William left the room aligned with his father, but not untouched by what he had heard. The king had given him the reason, and the reason was heavier than the order itself. Now the palace could prepare its public framing. But outside the gates, Britain had already begun to react. What began behind closed doors was about to break into headlines, broadcasts, and crowds that turned one estate decision into a national royal judgment. By morning, the story no longer belonged to the palace. It belonged to Britain. The private wound became a public spectacle, printed in bold type, debated by broadcasters, whispered outside royal gates, and dissected by every voice that believed this was more than a property decision. Catherine's rise had become visible. Camilla's loss had become undeniable. The monarchy had shown its hand. Catherine read the palace statement in silence, and every careful word seemed to carry two meanings. The statement confirmed her stewardship role over Highgrove's private heritage grounds, meaning she now held official responsibility for protecting the estate's private legacy and guiding how it would be used in the future. That mattered, because Highgrove was tied to Charles's identity, not just royal property. Whoever held authority there held a piece of the king's memory, and now that piece had been placed with Catherine. The palace tried to keep the language soft. The statement spoke of continuity, preservation, and future responsibility, avoiding any direct mention of Camilla's disappointment. Continuity, in royal language, means making sure the monarchy's traditions and private symbols survive from one generation to the next. But everyone understood what had been left unsaid. Catherine had been trusted with the future. Camilla had been removed from the center of a place she once believed would confirm her belonging. Camilla saw the morning coverage and pushed the newspaper away. The queen consort could not keep looking at Catherine's name printed beside Highgrove. The pain was no longer hidden in private briefings or quiet rooms. It had become public shape, public judgment, public humiliation. She had lost influence inside the palace first. Now she was watching the country learn it over breakfast. Then the image that captured everything arrived. The Crown Herald ran a front page showing Highgrove's gates beneath the headline, "Catherine given the King's Sanctuary." The phrase hit hard because it made the decision feel sacred, almost final. The King's Sanctuary, meaning his most private place of emotional safety, was now linked to Catherine before the whole nation. In one headline, the future queen looked chosen, and Camilla looked left outside. Catherine understood the danger of praise. She knew every public compliment for her could deepen Camilla's private wound. William stood near her as the broadcaster's words moved through the room. The clearest sign yet that the future queen is already being trusted with the monarchy's most intimate legacy. The prince heard the meaning beneath the sentence. This was not only commentary, it was confirmation that Britain had begun to read the estate decision as a royal verdict. Camilla heard that same framing later, and the queen consort's expression hardened. The broadcaster had not shouted. The words had been calm, which made them worse. They turned her loss into analysis, her hurt into national conversation, and Catherine's authority into the accepted story of the day. Camilla had wanted Highgrove to make her feel permanent. Instead, the coverage made her absence feel official. William knew public reaction had strengthened Catherine's position, but he also knew it had forced the palace into one final emotional choice. The prince could see the question forming behind every closed door. Would the family treat this as Catherine's victory, Camilla's rejection, or Charles's final act of future planning? And when the noise finally settled, only one question remained inside the palace. Had this been a victory, a rejection, or the monarchy choosing its future at last? In the end, the estate did not simply pass into Catherine's care. It revealed the truth of the modern monarchy. Love, loyalty, history, pain, all of it mattered. But not all of it could decide the future. Camilla had coveted a place that made her feel permanent. Catherine inherited a responsibility that made her unavoidable. And Charles, with one signature, chose continuity over comfort. Catherine's office formally received the estate briefings, preservation plans, and ceremonial schedules tied to Highgrove's private heritage grounds. Estate briefings, meaning official updates about how a royal property is managed and protected, now arrived under her authority, not as a favor, but as the new order. That mattered, because Highgrove had become more than a home. It had become the place where personal memory, future duty, and royal trust finally collided. Catherine understood that every file placed before her carried Charles's past and William's future in the same breath. William stood beside her as the decision became part of the monarchy's future structure. The prince knew this was not a temporary family compromise designed to calm one difficult week. It was a permanent signal. Catherine was no longer only preparing for queenship, meaning the future role of standing at the center of royal duty beside the king. She was already shaping the emotional architecture of that future, deciding how history would be held, protected, and passed on without being pulled apart by private longing. Camilla had one final private conversation with Charles, and this time the queen consort did not fight the decision. She told the king she understood why he had done it, even if the wound remained. Charles listened carefully, because he knew understanding did not erase pain. The monarch had chosen the future, but the woman beside him had lost something she believed would make her feel permanent. Camilla's voice did not break, yet the sadness inside it was unmistakable. Catherine sent Camilla a quiet, handwritten message afterward. A handwritten message, in this world of formal statements and palace files, meant something personal enough to escape official language. She acknowledged what Highgrove had meant to the queen consort, and promised to preserve what Charles had built with dignity. Catherine did not offer triumph. She offered respect. And that respect mattered, because it turned a painful transfer of power into something less cruel, even if it could never become painless. Charles kept the Highgrove Garden dedication memo sealed. The king did not do it to protect secrets or hide weakness. He did it to stop the monarchy from turning one painful moment into public humiliation. That choice revealed the last truth of the whole affair. Charles had not forgotten what happened. He had simply decided that punishment did not need spectacle. The crown could correct its course without destroying the people caught inside the correction. William recognized the meaning before anyone said it aloud. Catherine's appointment was the clearest sign yet that she was no longer waiting outside the center of power. The future queen had stepped into responsibility with sorrow, restraint, and strength. Camilla's chapter of personal longing had reached its limit. Camilla's chapter of royal duty had begun in full force. The monarchy did not choose against Camilla as a woman. It chose for Catherine as the future. There is no unresolved ending here. Highgrove became the line where the old emotional claims of the crown gave way to the steady hands chosen to carry it forward. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.